Hey, hello everybody. Hey Nuxters. I'm super excited to be here with you, especially in this special day when the Nuxt free stable is released, and also Charlie, the unicorn, he's equally excited. Say hey, Charlie. Okay, he is quite shy. We'll get back into this. So let me introduce myself a little bit before I will go further for those who don't know me. So my name is Filip Rakowski, and as I was introduced, I'm a CTO and co-founder of Vue Storefront. What is Vue Storefront? We'll get into that in just a moment. And I'm programming since I was 13. I started with server-side technologies, but the truth is I wasn't super excited about them. So as soon as I put my hands on JavaScript, I absolutely loved it. And as you could imagine, when I put my hands on Vue.js, I was above the moon. And I started using Vue.js since Vue 2.0, and since then I'm absolutely in love with that. And as I said, as I mentioned in my bio, I have two cats. One of them is called Geralt, of course, because I'm from Poland and we all have cats called Geralt. And the second one is called Fufi. So now, what is Vue Storefront? If you know what it is, raise your hand. And I have no idea if you did that or not, but we probably have this, mental connection I hear, I see from some of you. So the simplest words to describe Vue Storefront is just a front-end boilerplate and toolkit to build e-commerce front-end. So when you use technologies that are allowing you to build headless commerce storefronts and communicate with them through API, then you have to build the storefront. And trust me, it's a tough job. It's a lot of work. So what we do is we basically provide you everything to accelerate this work. And the project is free, it's open source, and it runs on Nuxt.js. So you should definitely try it out. You can just Google Vue Storefront and find a website or our GitHub repository. Now, in the last few years, I see that businesses put much more focus on the front end than before. I know it from experience. I run a company that is selling the front end. And of course, we front-end developers, we always knew that this is the most important part of the stack, right? But finally, the rest of the world is noticing it as well. And the biggest reason behind that is growing understanding of the importance of good user experience and how much it actually contributes to the revenue. But you don't have to believe me, I will just throw at you some statistics. So first of all, according to the Salesforce research report, 59% of customers are willing to pay more if we delight them with a good user experience. Good user experience puts our users in a good mood, and happy users are willing to spend more. Pretty obvious, right? Also, 70% of customers admit that page speed impacts their willingness to buy from an online retailer, and this is done by Deloitte. And we clearly see, even in the direct statistics, that time is money, and the loading time directly correlates to the conversion rate. And well, in fact, the front end is the part that drives revenue. The front end is the part that your users are interacting with, right? And this thing, the fact that front end is becoming so important, really accelerated the adoption of API first and headless approach, and a clear differentiation of rules between front end and the back end. So I like to think about it this way. The backend is responsible for business logic and delivering API and basically optimizing the workflows inside the company. And the front end is for your customers. Front end is for delivering a delightful user experience. So in this new paradigm, front end is usually built using JavaScript single-page application frameworks like React or, of course, Vue.js. And single-page application itself can, and in many cases do, improve user experience, but that's not all it takes to really build a good and delightful application these days. The amount of challenges in building great front-end experiences could feel really overwhelming, like really overwhelming. Applications also has to stand out from the crowd, be intuitive, support multiple devices, multiple browsers, be accessible, and of course, be fast. So this is why on top of the single-page application frameworks, the developer created something called meta frameworks, like Nuxt or Next, that kind of abstract the repetitive parts and focus just on getting things done. And JavaScript meta frameworks not only deliver better user experience, but first and foremost, they deliver better developer experience. And one of the most important parts of good user experience is performance. So good user experience is actually what will keep users on the website and make them come back. But the performance, I would call it a fundamental, really. Like if you don't do this right, your users might not even have a chance to notice and be blown away by your fantastic design skills and great transitions and this sort of stuff. So in this talk, I will dig deep into what Nuxt 3 has to offer in terms of performance optimization and try to answer a question, how actually Nuxt 3 is allowing us to make faster websites. So let's go. But before we dive into this fascinating topic, let's start with some key definitions to establish the groundwork for the future discussions and for the future slides. And that will help us to understand what exactly is web performance and what's more important, how we can quantify it. So based on the MDN definition, the holy grail of quantifying performance is exactly about this, finding objective measures that will quantify perceived user experience. So we are kind of looking for the objective measures to quantify something that is not objective but subjective. And Google is researching that for years, really. It's researching that for years and comes up with new improvements almost every year. And the current state of affairs is that 3 metrics developed by Google are the most important ones, and they are called Core Web Vitals. And Core Web Vitals is basically a minimal set of 3 key performance metrics, because of course we could have really a lot of metrics, a lot of performance metrics, but not all of them are crucial. And if you want to optimize, you have to find the most important ones. So here we have 3 key performance metrics describing this perceived user experience. And of course, please remember that the only metric that will actually tell you if the experience is good or bad is revenue, period. And you should never blindly believe anything, any metric, especially Lighthouse score, which really means nothing, and please remember that. But good Core Web Vitals don't mean necessarily that the experience is good, but I can assure you that the bad Core Web Vitals almost always mean that the experience is bad. So Core Web Vitals, those 3 metrics measure 3 things: loading experience, interactivity experience, and visual stability. And it all sums up the good or bad experience. And if you look at those 3 metrics, largest contentful paint, first input delay, and cumulative layout shift, and what are the wages that we are aiming for, we can conclude that a website that is fast is a website where the main content is visible below 2.5 seconds. The first interaction of a user is delayed less than 100 milliseconds. And 100 milliseconds is like psychological threshold for noticing any delay. So anything below 100 milliseconds is perceived as instant. And then less than 10% of elements on the website changes its position during page loading. And you probably saw a lot of websites when even the whole content is changing. So before we dig deeper, I want to establish one thing, is Nuxt even capable of that, out of the box or in a certain circumstances? So Builder.io, a company that is an author of great libraries like Quick or a Party Town, they have a GitHub repository with different framework benchmarks. And they also benchmark Nuxt 2 and Nuxt 3. Those benchmarks, I think, are from a month ago, though. So I hope they even improved. But even those results, they're pretty impressive. So let's take a look at the simplest possible Hello World application using server-side rendering. And if we take a look at the things that are most important to us, we could be a little bit surprised, because it looked like first contentful paint and largest contentful paint, they are actually better in Nuxt 2 in just a Hello World server-side rendered application. But also, let's be honest, a Hello World server-side rendered application is not a very realistic use case. And if that's all you want to build, you shouldn't use Nuxt, really. You should just create index.html file and put it on FTP. So let's go further. let's see an example of a simple application, which is a to-do application. And here we already see some major improvements. First of all, we see that total blocking time is much better and equals 0. And total blocking time is, well, a metric of measuring. It's a similar metric to first input delays, but this one can be measured in the lab, and first input delay can only be measured in the field, so on the real users. And a good total blocking time is kind of indicating that first input delay will also be good. Also, when we look at the amount of JavaScript, it also significantly reduced compared to Nuxt 2. Now let's look at something more complex. So a complex application, a dashboard application. And you could see this trend that the more complex application is, the better Nuxt 3 is performing. And here, basically, almost all metrics are better. And when we look at the metric the only metric that is worse, we're looking at first contentful paint, and the difference is really small. And if you look at, well, only 2 things that contribute to Core Web Vitals, they're both better in Nuxt 3. But before you will start thinking that these benchmarks are basically representing what your application will look like, I want you really to understand one thing. The most important thing about any benchmarks, any framework benchmarks, is that you shouldn't trust them. They are usually made in a certain environment. There are so many different things that could influence this benchmark. They could have been done in specific machines, or they could have been done wrong, or they could have been done on a previous version, etc., etc. Just don't trust them. This is a great way to do an early research and more or less understand, like, what you could expect, but do your own benchmarks, really. And even here, when I sent it to Daniel Rowe, Daniel said that this is basically not necessarily a result that is the same as his results when he was doing his own benchmarks. So again, benchmarks are useful, but they're definitely not a single source of truth. Okay, let's go further. And so I told you that I want to answer a simple question like, is Nuxt helping us to build faster applications? And of course, benchmarks are quite important. And right now we know that Nuxt is capable of great performance. But to me, what is really important when answering those questions is, can we actually ship a fast web application without having a web performance degree? So how much Nuxt is doing under the hood for us? And let's see how Nuxt can help us improve Core Web Vitals and how much work actually it requires on our end. And I will start with cumulating layout shift. So let's see what things could actually cause layout shifts in our application and how Nuxt is preventing that, if it is preventing that. So the first thing that could occur is flash of unstyled content. It's a common problem, and it is occurring when the markup renders before the CSS OM is starting to be generated and then applied to DOM. And it usually happens when we load our CSS asynchronously. So what Nuxt is doing to prevent that is inlining the global and CSS and the CSS from the current page inside the index.html. So as soon as we download index.html, we don't have to wait for any asynchronous CSS file or anything like that. We immediately have the files required to render the current page. But there's one problem with that. CSS is render blocking. What it means? It means that until this whole CSS from your website is parsed, until the CSS OM is created out of this, then your page won't be rendered. It's blocked. So you can even say that your page will be as slow as your slowest style sheet. So this is why it's extremely crucial to inline only CSS that is essential to not experience this flash of unstyled content and nothing more. And when you think a little bit what CSS markup is really crucial to avoid unstyled content, it's the one above the fold. And it's called critical CSS. Quite self-descriptive, you have to admit, right? And to inline only critical CSS in your index.html, you can use Nuxt.js Critters plugin. It actually requires zero configuration and just does its job. Critters is a library from Google, and Nuxt.js Critters plugin is just a port of this module to Nuxt.js. Okay, let's move to other things that could cause layout shifts. Text. Text can also be a major challenge, especially when we are using some third-party fonts that are not built into the operating system, like Roboto or Lato. We can experience either flash of unstyled content, flash of unstyled text, or sometimes even flash of invisible text. And it really depends on our CSS properties and if we are using a font display property or not. If we are not using font display property, we can have a flash of invisible text. If we are using font display property, we'll have flash of unstyled text, which is not as bad, but still bad. So what is the common way of dealing with this problem? A common way of dealing with this problem is providing a fallback font that is actually built into the system and displaying this fallback font until we download the desired font. And ideally, you should specify the properties of the fallback font so it occupies exactly the same amount of space as the desired font. Then you don't have any cumulative, any layout shifts. And you can use tools like Font Style Matcher to actually find the font that will match your custom font and adjust its size to occupy the same amount of space. But let's be honest, this could be a very frustrating and time-consuming work, even though this tool is amazing. And I really encourage you to play a little bit with that to understand that problem. I wouldn't advise to do this manually. This is why I highly recommend to use another Nuxt module from amazing Daniel, who is right now eating a dinner, and I will be going there very soon. Nuxt Font Metrics. So what it does, what Nuxt for Font Metrics does? Well, it automatically finds the best size for a fallback metric and automatically updates our CSS to use it. So it's a solution to the problem that I just described, and it just works automatically. So here you can see an example of the code that we write in our CSS. It's the code at the bottom. And then when the Nuxt Font Metrics applies its changes, it will generate the code at the top. And the great thing is that all of that happens during a build time. So there's absolutely no addition of JavaScript during runtime. And on a sample application, you can see how much this thing could change the layout sheet from 34% to less than 1%. It's pretty great, you must admit. But again, don't trust benchmarks, right? Okay, so now that we know that Nuxt is definitely helping with cumulative layout shift, what about other core web vitals? And well, the easiest way to have a high LCP and first input delay is by reducing the amount of JavaScript and following so-called purple pattern. So what is a purple pattern? It's not a single architecture. It's more like a set of techniques ensuring that your page will load fast. So let's see how Nuxt is actually helping us to apply those techniques into an application. Every request has its fetching priority. So when we initiate a website, when we download index.html, the index.html usually has a lot of dependencies, and they all have their own priorities. They're not just downloaded in parallel. And it's essential to download the most important files first, the files that will actually help us to render our route, so-called critical ones, as soon as possible, and really not waste time to download things that are needed later. And when we inspect the source of a Nuxt.js application, we'll see that Nuxt is basically automatically preloading the main JavaScript bundle as it is. That's great. We don't have to do anything, right? So we have that part checked. But Nuxt is actually doing much more because, yes, we are downloading the main bundle immediately. We're preloading this. But also Nuxt is ensuring that this main bundle is only having the code that we need to execute and has nothing redundant. So Nuxt automatically splits each route into a separate bundle, and thanks to that, we just don't need to download unnecessary code, and the browser doesn't have to parse it, so everything renders faster, especially when you have a mobile phone. You probably won't see a difference on a MacBook, but on a mobile phone, definitely you will see the difference. And the whole web performance optimization is basically for mobile devices. And in Nuxt 3, it goes far beyond the routes. Nuxt automatically detects what composables and what components we are using in any page to ensure that we're not executing redundant JavaScript. So I think that's great because Nuxt.js is basically doing code splitting for us. We don't need to think about this. It's a great developer experience. Now, executing only the necessary code is crucial to render the initial route as soon as possible. But the truth is, rendering is rarely a bottleneck these days. because usually we render our markup on the server or even serve a static file. And what is a real bottleneck is how long it takes for this website to become interactive. So from the moment when the page is static to the moment when it is fully hydrated. And just like in the previous case, the deciding factor here is amount of JavaScript that we have on our page. And of course, we should execute as few of it as possible. So let's remind how Nuxt.js helps with that. So we saw today on Sebastian's presentation that the initial bundle is just 32 kilobytes, which is a huge, huge, huge improvement over Nuxt 2. The initial total blocking time of the application is 0 millisecond, which is a good indicator that the first input delay will also be very low. Of course, then we have to make sure that it happens, but Nuxt is still doing a lot because it automatically imports and code splits all the routes, components, and composables to keep the bundle small. We talked a lot about rendering only the critical code and pushing it as soon as possible. And I think that is quite clear right now. But we also have to ensure that the rest of the code executes fast. So when the user is navigating to another route, they still have a smooth experience. And what we should do is we should prefetch the routes that could possibly be needed in the future. So we are, let's say, on the home page, and we are prefetching the bundle of the product page or of the category page, because we know that the user will probably enter that. So we want to prefetch this code. So when they click on it, they don't have to download. They just need to execute the JavaScript code, which gives almost instant response. And we can do this through prefetching. What is prefetching? Well, it's exactly what I described here. It's downloading the code that will be needed in the future in advance. And I'm really glad that Nuxt is not blindly prefetching all the possible routes, because imagine that you have a website with 200 pages. The user enters the website, and then in the background, they are downloading 200 pages. This could really result in enormous traffic on the server, but also a lot of unnecessary code in the browser memory. So no, Nuxt is actually smarter. How smarter it is? Well, with Nuxt link prefetch property, you can basically download bundles of the pages that they are linking to. As soon as this link will appear in the viewport, the below code, the link rel prefetch, will be added to the head, and then the bundle will be prefetched. So this way, we're actually downloading only the bundles from the links on our website that are visible on the viewport. This is super, super smart solution. Now, what about the last piece? What about lazy loading secondary content? Well, this time it's your job, because it really, really depends on the specifics of your application. But luckily, Nuxt team made sure that everything that can be done automatically is done automatically. And I hope that right now you're confident that Nuxt is doing a lot to help you achieve great performance on the front end, because it helps us to keep core web vitals under control. It helps us to implement purple pattern without us realizing it. And I think this is exactly the kind of developer experience that modern meta frameworks should offer. They shouldn't bother us with the implementation details. They just should help us get things done in the right way. But there's one more topic I wanted to mention about that really differentiates Nuxt 3 from its previous version and opens a whole new ocean of possibilities. Nuxt on the edge. So even though we tend to pre-render our applications, cache the results, not everything can work like that. There are some pages, there are some things that just has to be rendered dynamically, and we can cache them. And when that happens, it's best to render them on the edge, in the location that is closest to the user, to avoid unnecessary delays due to latency. And when we talk about rendering on the edge, we talk about basically running Nuxt on the edge function. And it was super hard with Nuxt 2. Its size was too big for edge rendering, and the cold start was far too long to deliver good performance. So let's see how it improved in Nuxt 3. As you can see, the Nitro cold start is more than 100 times faster than Nuxt 2 cold start. What is cold start? Well, every time you run a cloud function, every time you call it, it has to basically cold start the whole application. And for Nitro, it takes only 3 seconds for the application to be fully functional. It's insane. It's great, really, like amazing job. And when it comes to the disk space, because a lot of cloud function also has limitation when it comes to the disk space, It's also much, much, much smaller when we talk about Nitro. In addition, the developer experience is also much better because you can basically run Nuxt 3 on all mainstream cloud function providers with zero or sometimes with a minimal configuration thanks to the Nuxt toolbox. And to me, this is some totally next level developer experience, especially that I hate to configure this sort of stuff. Okay, I hope now you're excited about Nuxt 3 performance improvements as much as I am, and you can't wait to just port your Nuxt application to see how much faster it gets. So let me finish the talk with a dad joke, because why not? Are you ready? Are you ready, Charlie? Charlie is ready. Okay. So, why do Java developers wear glasses? A moment of silence to think. Because they don't see sharp. And thank you. Thank you, Nuxt Nation. It was a pleasure to be here. You can follow me on Twitter to just listen to my bad takes about web development and occasional web performance tips, and enjoy the rest of conference.
Can you, like, if we follow you on Twitter, will there be more dad jokes? Because if so, like, definitely need to go follow you on Twitter. I think I already follow you.
Yes, I can promise that there will be more dad jokes. I mean, I don't know many of them, but sometimes I post, and they're usually
that one
terrible.
was pretty good.
I swear they are terrible. I promise.
I like it. I like it. All right. So how does Nuxt Speed compare to some of the other popular front-end frameworks?
Well, so you saw the benchmarks that I posted, and I really encourage all of you to just Google builder.io framework benchmarks. You will see a GitHub repository where you can see actually how different frameworks are performing against different user scenarios. And again, don't blindly believe those benchmarks. From my experience, from the benchmarks that I did, from the pages that I've built with Nuxt 3, and I've built really simple pages, unfortunately, it is noticeably faster than Nuxt 2. And I think like the current performance is really like top-notch in the industry. Of course, we see some frameworks like Qweek. We see some frameworks like Astro. They are faster, but they're also for a little bit different applications, for much simpler applications that are mostly static. While Nuxt, I think it would make a perfect fit for any kind of application from a medium one to an enterprise one. So we have to keep that in mind, really.
Great. Thank you. And I mean, along this journey, you've definitely done a lot of research and worked on performance. I can only imagine of how much research you've done. Do you see any areas that Nuxt 3 could improve on?
Well, maybe not Nuxt 3 specifically, really, because I think Daniel, Puya, and the rest of and Anthony and the rest of the people that contributed to Nuxt, they did absolutely amazing job. And as a web perf geek, I had so much fun digging into the repository, finding all of those improvements, and kind of getting into their heads and finding the way of thinking that they were trying to translate into the framework. But I think the huge problem of the current JavaScript application is that the more features we deliver, the slower our application gets, because the more JavaScript we have to execute. And frameworks like Qweek, frameworks like Qweek, they are solving this problem already by using a technical reasonability. And I would love to see such solutions in Nuxt 3 or basically Vue.js, because I think that's the problem of all front-end frameworks these days. And it's a problem that was proven to be solved by Qweek, and before that by Wiz, like a framework inside Google. So I would love to see something like this also in Vue.js and Nuxt-based. And to be fair, I saw even you was also contributing something to Qweek and collaborating. So I hope he also thinks right now how to translate those ideas into Vue.
I will say, you just gave me a bit of an idea, and also a memory of when I first started Teach Gen Tech. I had Mishko on, who Mishko created Quick, for those who may not know. And now I'm like, ooh, it could be cool to like do like a comparison of the two.
Yeah, but the truth is like Qweek really wins on a large scale, and this is why I would love to see such solutions in the frameworks. It will probably require a lot of work, because as far as I know from what I've heard from the Qweek team, They had to write their own framework because the current frameworks were not supporting this, but I'm pretty sure that to some degree you can do this. Also, I would love to see in Nuxt 3 like a static first mode, because still all the pages are dynamic first, and for most of us we just work with the defaults. So if the defaults would be to make things static and we will have to explicitly set some things as dynamic, I'm pretty sure that, you know, on scale and statistically it will really improve the performance of Nuxt.js websites. Even though this is, you know, just a thing that we can do manually, the defaults really matter.
Thank you. And all right, which Nuxt performance enhancements are only possible due to universal rendering and which could be fairly easily mimicked in vanilla Vue.js SPA?
That's a very interesting and deep question. I would say, you know, like anything that requires you to just render the application beforehand, like critical CSS, for example. This is something that is possible only with Nuxt and with universal rendering or server-side rendering. But most of the optimizations I mentioned, they are possible in a Vue.js single-page application. But the thing is, if you are just having a Vue.js single-page application that is not server-side rendered, then you're relying 100% on JavaScript to render the whole page. And this on itself is a huge performance bottleneck.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And all right, second to last question of, is there any way to auto post component type? And a example is listed. Take a look at the screen for instance type. And then the rest of it is I have to import my component every time.
Oh, that's a simple question. I have no idea.
I do love the honesty when, especially I feel like developers and those who work on so much of the tech industries are like, yeah, we'll figure it out. It'll happen. Who knows? Go research. And I love that because it's like, it's not a false truth. So great question and great answer.
Exactly. Like we shouldn't be afraid to admit that we don't know things. I don't know too many things to admit here.
I dig it. And last but not least, what is something that you're grateful for?
Oh my God. Basically everything. I'm extremely privileged. I mean, you know, I live in Europe. I live in a country that is peaceful. I am earning good money. I'm healthy. Like I can go on and on and on and on and on. And also right now I have a very nice tool to put my hands on.
Yes. And thank you for that. And thank you for joining us today. And everybody, look at our names. A lot of them will have Twitter handles. So that way you can go follow Filip and stay in touch. Thank you, Filip.
Thanks so much, Jen.